Have you ever wondered why some Web3 projects launch and they reach, billion-dollar market cap in a very short amount of time, and then the vast majority of projects either have some short-term success or nobody ever really finds out about them in the first place? Well, that's what we're going to go very deep on today. So my name is Robert. I've been doing marketing for about a decade. And so I've been digging very deep into Web3 for the last 18 months or so. And in this video, I wanted to share it's sort of like a compilation of the most important things that I've shared on my channel so far. And so we're going to talk about 10 different sort of pillars or 10 different things that I find very useful to understand when I speak to founders and I tell them about these things and they go, wow, I just didn't realize the rabbit hole goes this deep. I find these things to be very useful to be aware of. So I do recommend grabbing a pen and paper. Ignore the sidebar with the other videos for the duration of this video, and I think you'll find a lot of value here. Not because I'm so brilliant, but a lot of the things that I've picked up along the way are from people way smarter than me. And so let's crack into this video. Go grab a pen and paper and let's do this. So we need to start from the very beginning. We need to get a base layer understanding of where marketing comes from, or sort of what makes marketing effective. I've consumed some Web3 marketing content myself, and what I hear from people who speak to me, who've watched my videos, and what I see with my own eyes from the stuff that I've seen out there so far is they just go straight into tactics. There's no sort of base layer understanding of what drives human behavior. Why does something work? Why doesn't it work? Like just the other day, I was reading an article about Web3 marketing, and like before we've established any sort of understanding of, why does this work? Why doesn't it work? Blah, blah, blah. It's just straight into like, here's how to use NFTs in your project. Or not even how, just you should use NFTs in your project, or you should use influencer marketing. But it's like, I don't even know what to do with that, right? Now, of course, I know what to do with it because I'm a marketing nerd and this is all I do. But that's not useful to the average, let's say, Web3 founder or Web3 marketer, that you just start thinking about tactics right away. There needs to be an understanding of what drives human behavior, because at the end of the day, that's what marketing is really all about. That's what we're here for. We're here to convince people that it's a good idea to pay attention to what we do and invest your time and your money potentially, and sort of pay attention to what we're doing over here. And so that really, as far as the base layer understanding goes, we have to go look at human behavior biology, because fundamentally, men and women, we have this one sort of desire that's hard-coded in us. That's most of us are not walking around thinking about this. But at the end of the day, if you go and study human behavior biology, what you're going to find is there is a common denominator between all human beings. And it's not always going to play out that way. But what that is, and this goes back thousands of years, is that we have a desire to leave copies of our DNA. We want to leave as much of, we want to leave our genes on this planet. And so once you have that understanding, it allows you to take some very absurd behavior and you can apply it to this base layer understanding. And all of a sudden, something that seems quite absurd starts to make sense. So I'll give you an example. There's a type of monkey called a tamarin monkey. And what researchers found when they studied these monkeys was absurd, what they found. And on the surface level, you're like, I can't really explain this, but you take it back to that base layer understanding of human behavior biology, and in this case, monkey behavior biology. What they found was that there were cases where mothers were murdering their own babies. And so on the surface level, you go, well, if your core desire here is to leave copies of your genes on the planet, then this is a contradiction to that. So this doesn't make any sense. So what you have to do is look deeper. And so what they found was that with the tamarin monkeys, basically the mother was effectively making a calculation of what are my odds here of being pregnant with this child, giving birth to the child, and helping that child reach adolescence, right? So it's like a probability thing. And what they found was that there are certain variables that would really sort of dictate the outcome here, or the probability. And things like how many males are around in the tribe to, let's say, help protect them and that sort of thing. And effectively, in the cases where the mother ended up murdering her own child, it really came down to the mother thought that the probability of success here, let's say, the probability of this child making it to adulthood is so low, and that I am X years old, I can only be pregnant or have kids for X amount of, more time. It takes X amount of time to get pregnant, to have the child, to raise the child. I think that if I want to leave copies of my genes on this planet, I'm actually going to have a higher probability of success by, getting rid of this child, getting pregnant at a later time when the odds are more in my favor, and playing my cards that way. Of course, this is very sad, right? I mean, it's quite dark stuff that we're starting off here with. You got to bear with me. I'm just setting the stage for the fact that the behavior can always be explained, even though on the surface level it doesn't, always make sense in a way. And another example to think of is Heaven's Gate was a cult. Effectively, what happened in this cult was there's this guy, his name is Marshall Applewhite. He's a complete psycho. And he basically ends up convincing 39 people to commit suicide. And so again, you have this behavior that cannot be explained. It's contradictory with the core desire to want to leave copies of your genes. So you need more context, right? The devil's in the details. What he had successfully done was that he had gotten those 39 people to believe that, we're not killing ourselves, we're graduating. That's the term that they were using. They were graduating to another life, to or even this life, but to sort of be reincarnated. I don't know all the details, but the idea was you were graduating to something better, where you're going to have a perfect life, a perfect body, and blah blah blah. So you weren't actually canceling this idea of being able to leave copies of your genes. You were actually improving your chances of that by doing this very absurd thing of committing suicide. So that's a very interesting thing to understand, just sort of as a base layer understanding. Like, human behavior really comes down to this many times. And then there are other layers on top of that are going to dictate behavior in different ways. And so, another quick example that's useful to think of is, the guy who buys the Lambo, he would have told himself that I want the Lambo because, I like fast cars, and I like the way that this thing is designed. But in reality, 9 times out of 10, the reason the guy wants the Lambo is because he inherently knows that this is going to increase my status on the social hierarchy. This is going to increase my chances of attracting, a female that's going to be able to have my kids. And, that's going to allow us to sort of achieve this goal that I have. So a lot of human behavior, if you dig deeper, it can all be explained by this sort of human behavior biology. And sociology is a big part of this. Like we just talked about status, right? Which kind of falls into that category. So that's that sort of base layer understanding. And I think before we kind of proceed, so this is really like the first thing out of the 10. And what I'm doing here is trying to explain the foundation of marketing and so on. And so I think a useful question to ask also is, what is marketing? So the way that I see it is, it's basically an opportunity, it's about creating an opportunity for project growth by communicating the value that you have to offer, right? And so, that growth can be different things. It can be people, like users of the product, like actual customers, maybe like liquidity providers in a DeFi protocol or something like that. It could be followers. It could be people joining a Discord or something along those lines, right? So that's how I think about marketing. And as far as foundation goes, I think we've set the base layer understanding of human behavior biology. A lot of it comes back to this, and we're going to dig into sort of like the next layer a little bit later when we talk about community and archetypes and that sort of stuff. And we've also have an understanding now that, this is what marketing is. We're trying to create an opportunity to make a sale or get a follower or something like that by communicating the value that we have to offer. Okay, so value. What is value? And when we talk about pretty much anything, and very much so in the stock market and the crypto market, there's two ingredients or two elements that you add them together and they're going to give you a value, and that's what people assign to the value of that token or product, whatever you want to call it. And those two elements or ingredients are intrinsic value and perceived value. Talked about this in the past. And so the intrinsic value is really sort of, how much is the problem that this is solving for me worth to me, right? So if a car is going to take you from A to B, that's going to be worth something to you because the trade-off or the other alternative, let's say, would have been to walk or to jump on a bicycle. But, it's raining, it's going to take me, 25 minutes instead of 5 minutes. What is that worth to me? So that's all intrinsic value. That's really rooted in this thing is solving some type of problem for me. How much is that problem, how much is, getting that problem solved worth to me? And then we have this other interesting component of perceived value. And so perceived value is very much more on an emotional level. And so if we go back to the example with the Lambo, the Lambo is going to have some sort of intrinsic value. It's going to help him get from A to B. It might have some sort of intrinsic value and it gives him access to, let's say, like a Lamborghini club of other owners, and maybe there's some networking potential there or whatever the case may be. But there's also this massive emotional component, the perceived value. So for him, he's going to feel good about himself. He's going to feel like, maybe I'm so proud of all the hard work that I put in that allowed me to get here. He's going to feel like, hey, I'm driving around, everybody's looking at me, so I feel important, right? So with every product, there's sort of this logical component, that's the intrinsic value, and then there's an emotional component to that. And so the typical example that I give to kind of illustrate this, where you can see this play out, where there's an intrinsic value that's actually higher than the other product, but the other product makes up for it in higher perceived value, and that's Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. Again, I've mentioned this other times in my channel or in my videos, but effectively what it comes down to is they've done a blind taste test. Pepsi is the better product. When they do the blind test, you remove the labels. Most people are actually bigger fans of Pepsi than they are of Coca-Cola. Now, when you and I go to the store, chances are we're actually going to buy Coca-Cola. And so as a marketer, the very fascinating question is, well, what the hell is going on here? Why is that? So if you remove the label, I'll go for this can. But if you put the label on, all of a sudden I'm going to change my mind, but the product didn't actually change. Well, that's the emotional level, right? So for Coca-Cola, they have been really trying to associate their product with happiness. You can see it on their ads. You can, study like their video ads and see what they're trying to communicate. And a lot of it is actually, in Coca-Cola's case, is sort of built around dopamine. Like a lot of the ads these days, back in the day, it was sort of like trying to associate with Santa Claus and happy times and these sorts of things. And now they're more leaning into this sort of dopamine-driven happiness, where it's a lot of the videos or a lot of the commercials these days, if you go watch them on YouTube, you'll find that they basically all have this massive lead-up process, and then the video basically ends with somebody chugging a Coke. So dopamine is the chemical release that feels very good in the anticipation of a reward. It's not when you actually get the reward, it's the anticipation. So it's all about the build-up, right? And so that's a very good example because it does illustrate this thing out there in the real world. So intrinsic value is, worth X amount, but the perceived value, which is often much sort of faster to improve, can have a dramatic impact. It literally gets us to change our mind from, hey, I want a Pepsi to, hey, I want a Coca-Cola. And so a lot of Web3 marketing really comes down to focusing on perceived value. And that includes, having a brand that people want to take part in and that sort of thing. And I'm also making sure here that I'm not telling you that you can do a bad job or have a crappy product and just make up for it with hype. That's not what I'm saying. When I talk to projects and when I consult with projects, I'm for long-term success. We've all seen this graph, right? Seen a lot of those crypto projects. So we don't want that. We don't want the short-term stuff. We want long-term success. And so it's very important when it comes to intrinsic and perceived value, that the intrinsic value, it's sort of like table stakes now, that you should have a great product, you should solve a great problem. But the perceived value are things that you can, these are levers that you can pull that can actually make a big difference in a shorter amount of time, because oftentimes going back and like improving the product is a ton of work, right? So that's really an important, very important sort of piece of the puzzle here. So the second thing, or the second topic of this video, is really about value, right? So you got intrinsic value, you got perceived value, and what you'll find is that there's been a lot of short-term success in crypto where there was very little intrinsic value and a lot of perceived value. And I mean, there are meme coins. I think Dogecoin hit like $89 billion market cap or something in the last bull run. And there's no intrinsic value, right? It's all perceived value. So what you're going to find is that every industry has a four stage, it's called the market life cycle. There's four stages. So there's the introduction stage, there's the growth stage, there's the maturity stage, and then there's the decline. As you travel along the life cycle of the market, people are going to see more competitors. They're going to have more choice. They're going to learn from mistakes. Like a quick example is, on the last bull run, sort of late or all of 2021, play to earn became this big thing. Everybody was jumping on, I forget the name, but the one everybody was playing in the Philippines. And then we saw a massive decline after that. And so that's an example of where tokenomics design was sort of flawed from the beginning. You cannot just print money and give it to people. You'll end up with hyperinflation, and the thing is just not going to work long term, right? They're sort of relying on more people entering the network in order for the thing to continue to work, and eventually that just doesn't work anymore. So that's a mistake that people have seen, and then when new projects come up, in fact, I hear this in a lot of projects that I consult with, that this is something that we're very wary of, and we have to be mindful of this, and we have to do a better job here. So people, projects learn from the mistakes of others, so they have to sort of continue to improve. And then the consumers of a product or a project, they are looking at what happened here in the past, and then they get more and more sort of competitors join, so they have more option. And then from the sort of end result here is that we end up with better projects, higher intrinsic value, right? They're solving problems. And then the perceived value can still be a very helpful thing as far as elevating everything that you're doing. But you're going to see less and less and less of these hype only type projects because the market is just not going to accept it. Go back to the market life cycle. I would say that the crypto industry is probably in the second stage, in the growth stage. So it's actually a fantastic place to sort of be in the industry. Things get a lot less exciting when there's a lot more people in there, a lot more competitors. Everything just gets harder. Ultimately, it's better probably for most people, especially the consumer. But for people that are, Web3 founders and people working on projects, your life is going to get more difficult as the industry matures. That's really the second point. And the next thing that we have to sort of discuss is this idea of a sustainable business model. I've spoken to a lot of projects that are in the DeFi space, a lot of them doing DEXs and that sort of thing. And, Web3 almost inherently, this is sort of a byproduct of something good. So a lot of Web3 projects are open source, right? A lot of DEXs are open source, unless they have some sort of other component that's not. But what this means is that it's very easy to copy you. We just spoke about the product or the market lifecycle. What happens is that if it's very easy to copy you, and if other people see that you're successful, you're making money, all this stuff, other people are gonna flock around and they're gonna start forking your product, and the sustainability factor of your project is just not gonna be in your favor. If you got some project that's crushing it, well, you're just gonna start seeing one fork a day, two forks a day, three forks a day, everybody competing for the same audience, for the same customers. They're competing for attention. They're undercutting each other with prices, lower fees and whatnot. And before you know it, it's like, yeah, you might be getting some customers, but the only way you were able to do that was by, giving them a better deal, which ultimately means that you're not making any money. And so now you actually don't have a business anymore. So it's a very interesting thing. You have to be very mindful of how easy is it to copy what we are doing. And as a starting point, it's totally fine to build something that is open source and that people can come in and copy. But if you're looking for long-term success, that's not going to be enough, right? So when we think about the difficulty of the problems that you solve, you have to, once you've built the initial thing, let's just say that you had a DEX and it was maybe even a fork of somebody else. If you wanted to have long-term success with that, you would have to start to solve other problems for people as well. If you think about Amazon, they started selling online books online, right? How do you think Amazon would be doing if that's the only thing that they did, if they never expanded into other areas? Well, they probably would not be alive today. Like that company would have crumbled a long time ago. And so what happened with Amazon was they started selling books, then they started selling everything online, then they went into, having a massive market share in the cloud infrastructure space. They have entertainment with their own streaming platform. I think they even have like a studio that produces a lot of content. They have, reading devices, They are really a supply chain and logistics company. So they went into all these other areas. They went into other businesses. They went into other areas of the world and started solving other problems for people. And the more problems you end up solving, or the larger problems you end up solving, the harder it is for other people to come in and just fork what you're doing and steal your customers over day. Sushi Swap was a fork of Uniswap, right? They came in and they made a better offer, and they stole $1 billion worth of liquidity in like 7 days from the same product. And so you're going to see this play out, right? So depending on what you're working on, what type of project you have, as far as sustainability goes, you have to think of that in terms of what is difficult to copy here. Because if you're just going to do something that somebody could copy or fork tomorrow and offer the same thing or even a better thing, you're not going to be in business for very long. And the other part of this is, as we talked about the life cycle of the market. What's going to happen, if you play this out over a long period of time, when everybody starts to fight for the same customers, you have this formula basically, which is whoever has the highest customer lifetime value is gonna win. And the reason why they're gonna be able to win is because they're gonna be able to spend the most amount of money to acquire a customer. Whoever can spend the most amount of money to acquire the customer wins in the long term, right? And the reason for that is that if you take two projects and one of them has a customer lifetime value of $100, so let's say they on average get $100 in revenue from that one customer. Let's say another product that is, let's say all else equal as far as the consumer is worried, but they have $1,000 customer LTV because they're solving other problems on the back end and they're monetizing that. Well, what's going to happen when this space becomes incredibly saturated and there's a lot of products on the market, there's a lot of competitors? Well, people are going to be spending money, or projects going to be spending money in different ways, whether it's through, influencer marketing or advertising or whatever the case may be. SEO, like email marketing, they're going to be spending money to acquire attention and to convert that attention into a customer, project follower, whatever you want to call that. So what happens there is, if we're both spending $90 to acquire the customer, you're still in business. But as soon as we start to get to 110 and you're losing $10 for every customer that you acquire, and I'm still making $890, I'm just going to eat you alive, right? So customer lifetime value is really about what is a customer worth to you in the entire life cycle of that customer. And then you have to be pumping that number up. Well, how do you do that? Well, you solve other problems for people, right? So customer lifetime value is a number that's not talked about in crypto at all right now because there's not enough competition. But that's going to be a very, very big thing that people have to understand if you want to have a sustainable business in the space, because the project that can spend the most amount of money to acquire the customer is going to win. That's just the math of it. So that's really important. And I think a good example of that also outside of just Amazon is McDonald's, right? So McDonald's sells the most hamburgers in the world. Is it because it's the best hamburger in the world? I mean, I'm a massive Big Mac fan, but there are local burger joints in every city in the world that make better burgers than McDonald's. So why is McDonald's eating them alive? Well, it comes back to the same idea, customer lifetime value. And so while let's say wherever city or town that you live in, I'm sure there's a burger joint that you know of, that you love. I mean, who doesn't love burgers? And what's happening in that place is that they're selling you burgers and fries, and they're making money from the burgers and fries, and that's where it ends. And so that's the only thing that they're really profiting from. So they are, the customer lifetime value there is really the profit or the revenue that they're bringing in from that purchase, and then how many times you're going to visit them over the lifetime of your career. What McDonald's does is that they also started off doing that. And then there's a great scene in the movie The Founder where, Ray Kroc runs into, I think he's an accountant, and he's like explaining the business, and he's explaining, because the accountant saw the numbers and he's like, you guys are losing money. Like, you should be making loads of money right now and you're not. So talk to me about the business. And he talks to him about the business, and he's like, yeah, what happens is, we have these franchisees, and they go out there, they find a plot of land, they lease the land, then they become a franchisor, they throw up the burger joint, they start selling it, and then, we start making whatever, like a 1% cut on a 15-cent burger. It's like way back in the day, right? And the guy's like, well, you're in the wrong business. That's not the business that you're in. You're not in the burger business. You're in the real estate business. What you should be doing is you should be going out there. You should buy the land as McDonald's. You should then go to the franchisee, and as a as part of their agreement, it says that they can lease the property or the land from you and you only. So you start making money before they've even thrown up the McDonald's location. And then you're getting paid off of the payments that they're making on a monthly basis for leasing the property from you, right? So that's the back end of McDonald's. They make a ton of money from that side of the business, and that allows them to go out there and spend much more on advertising than the local burger joint, which allows them to expand, and then becomes sort of like a vicious cycle for the local burger joint. They don't have enough money to expand because they're only making money off of the burgers, and the opposite happens for McDonald's. They got all this cash coming in, which allows them to go out there and expand, and so the brand grows, the awareness grows, people like the product, so they come back, and that's how you win. So it's very much like you're either losing, it's either like a death spiral, or it's going the exact opposite way. So that's a very important thing to understand. And I think one way to think about this is you sort of have to go beyond the code. You can't just have your unless there's like very complex operations involved where that's the moat, that's the competitive advantage, then you got to go beyond the code as far as just having an open source project that somebody could fork tomorrow and they can be up and running and up and running their business like the next day and stealing your customers. So that's really the third thing here. Sustainable business model. You have to be aware of that if you want to be here for the long term. Okay, so we've done the foundations or the fundamentals. We've talked about value as far as intrinsic value and perceived value. We've talked about the sustainability factor. And now we're going to talk about something that you're not going to like, but by raising your awareness on this idea, it's actually going to help you. And before we go into that, if you like what we've done so far, by all means, do subscribe to the channel. I have other videos. I'm putting out other videos, and we're doing interviews and all sorts of things. Now, the biggest variable to success. When I found out about what we're about to talk about, I sort of cross-referenced it with my own experiences, and I found that this is true. And it's something that's outside of your control, but if you're aware of it, you can use it to your advantage. So when it comes to your Web3 project, and also, let's say, things within your project, like trying to score press or something like that, there's this component. So there's this guy, he runs a company called Idea Lab. There's a TED Talk, one of my favorite TED Talks, where they've started and funded hundreds of companies. And so this guy, he talks about it in the TED Talk. He went back and he looked at all of their companies and he sort of graded them, which ones became successful, which ones were not successful. And then he looked at 5 different components to try to figure out what was the biggest contributor to the success here. And maybe in the, and the opposite, right? So in the cases where it didn't work out, was this variable absent? And what they looked at was they looked at the idea, they looked at the team, they looked at the sort of business model behind it, they looked at the funding, and then they looked at the timing of the market. And what they found was that as he went and he charted all these startups that they'd been involved in and how successful they were, they found that the number one contributor to success out of those 5 things was it was not the team, it was not the business model, it wasn't their funding or the idea itself, it was the timing. And so when I heard that, I immediately said, because I inherently had sensed this before or in my experience, and I was like, man, this makes a lot of sense. And the reason for that is that, things have relevancy to us depending on, what's going on in the world or in our lives. And so when there is a topic that is relevant at the time, then the likelihood of doing something there, let's say taking action on something, then that's going to increase dramatically. And so he gave a couple of examples of Uber and things of that nature where I believe they sort of came up just at the 2008 financial crisis. So drivers who are looking for different ways to make money and that sort of thing. And this allowed them that opportunity. And again, when I cross-reference to my own experience, I've launched a bunch of different companies in the past. And I found that in some cases, it was so easy to sell. It was so effortless. And that's why, if you look at crypto, at the time of this recording, a lot of the successes that you've seen so far, it wasn't necessarily that they had a great idea or a great team. It was just they were early and everybody was talking about crypto because it was a bull run or that sort of thing. So when it comes to your project, timing is incredibly important. And so if you try to launch today a 10,000, PFP NFT project, chances are nobody's going to care. But if you did that in June 2021, chances are you probably would have sold out, because of the timing, not because you were great at it, not because even the artwork was great or there was utility, just the timing. It was, the right timing. Everybody was talking about it and all these things. So timing is really interesting. And I actually just had an interview, I believe 2 days ago, with a guy named Andre. He's a former editor at Cointelegraph. And we also talked about this within the news cycle, right? So he was saying how there's macro trends and sort of micro trends. And if you're playing into that, then your ability to go out there and score press for your project is just going to go up tremendously. So timing is really something that you should be considering, and it's something that should be part of your decision making. And maybe it's the wrong time to launch. Maybe you should delay it. Maybe you need to hurry up and launch a product or a project that's not really where you want it to be, but you know that if you take all the time needed to get the product to where you want it, you might miss out on the boat. You might miss this great opportunity right now where everybody's talking about it, everybody's writing about it in the media. You could be jumping on that wave and just be okay with the fact that the product is not ready. Let's launch something that's not where we want it to be, but it's good enough to get it out there and sort of capitalize on what's happening right now. And then, there's nothing preventing you from just continuing to improve the product as you go, right? So timing is just something that I want you to be aware of as the sort of fourth topic here, because it can make your life so much easier or so much more difficult depending on the timing. And so again, I'm seeing it with my own eyes. The last consulting company that I had was, we talked about the life cycle of a market. It was on the last stage. It was on the decline, where every day that we were in business was more difficult than the day before because we had new entrants into the market, because the barriers to entry were very low. Customers' demands were going up. They were getting more choice. More people were coming in and selling to the same people. And so people had to make better offers. They had to offer more for less money. And it just became sort of a bloodbath. And then when I pivoted to Web3, I found that because the market life cycle, we're in the sort of growth stage, it means that every day is actually slightly better than the day before, because the amount of people that are entering from a consumer perspective to the market every day is more than the people entering as a supplier, as a seller. And so for now, it's great because of the timing. And then we know the market life cycle, so it's going to mature at some point, and then it'll reach a decline as well. And so the thing about timing, it can really work in your favor. And as we've talked about, it can be sort of a, macro thing as far as like your actual project. So should you launch your project prematurely because the timing is perfect right now? Maybe you have to put a couple of features on hold in order to get the project out there, launch your mainnet, depending on what you're doing, in order to just reap the rewards of the fact that the timing is perfect right now, and then worrying about those other features slightly later, as opposed to, hey, let's stick to the original scope, let's get this thing to this point, and then you miss out on this massive opportunity that you have because of the timing is perfect right now. So that's really it for timing. I just wanted you to be aware of the fact that the guy did the study. In his opinion, timing was the number one factor in the companies that he studied. In my experience, I can very much agree with that, because I have, like I said, started many different types of businesses, and I always found that the time when I was on it with the timing, which was completely just luck, it was so much easier to be successful. So again, apply that macro level, micro level. Maybe there's an opportunity to get press. That would be sort of a micro thing, right? Because you are working, you're building on this blockchain, and right now this blockchain is getting a lot of press. So maybe you can score some kind of story because of that. So timing is very, very important. Okay, we're going to switch now to, I believe it's the fifth topic of today's discussion. So we're actually coming back a little bit to the sustainability idea. We're going to talk about community. Community is something that I've talked about before on my channel. I will keep it brief, but I am going to cover the most important things for you to understand. Again, base layer understanding of what it is. So Again, we can think of the value of a community from an intrinsic and a perceived value. And it's almost like an internal and external value, really. So internally, the reason why community is valuable is because you have sustained attention. You have the attention of a group of people for a long period of time. I joined my first online community in like 2012, literally 10 years ago. And that community, I'm still talking to people on a daily basis from that community because the guy who started it, who's now a very good friend of mine, he did what I'm about to explain to you very well. And because of that reason, he basically got a bunch of people in a room together, first online and then offline, where we had one core desire that we all wanted. Like we wanted the same thing in life. And because of that, there was this massive bond. So I remember the first meeting I had with a guy from the community, and I was just blown away by how similar he was to me. And so if you play that out over 10 years, even though that community is actually not being sort of maintained, I'm still talking to people from that community on a daily basis. That's the power of a real community. So that's like the internal side, right? And then what's the value that a community can bring you externally? So that means if you have a large amount of people in your community, so let's say you have a lot of social media followers, let's say you have a lot of people in your Discord, let's say there's a lot of engagement, well, that's sending signals to the outside world. You know, human beings, we're going to talk about this later, human beings basically evaluate things based on how other people evaluate things. So if we see that a lot of other people are following a channel or following it, and you know this, like if you see a Twitter account with 68 followers, your immediate assumption is nobody cares about this, I probably shouldn't care about this. And if you see a social media, let's say a Twitter account with 1.3, like a personal profile with 1.3 million followers, you're going to go, lots of people care about this. I should probably look into this as well because they have already evaluated it for me. So that's what you get externally. You're sending these signals that you are somebody that's sort of worth paying attention to. And so just wanted to establish that as a base layer foundation for why, what is the value of a community? So there's those two, internal and external. Now, quickly, I'm going to talk about the two terms that I think community gets confused with, that it is not. The first one, Celsius froze withdrawals. CEO comes on Twitter, basically says something to the effect of, we have to do this. It sucks. Thank God we have such a loving, supportive community. We're going to get through this together, blah, 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 blah. And the comment section is full of people that are like, hey, give me my fucking money back. And now we have track records showing how this guy is like pulling money out. And so what they had in Celsius was not a community. He was confusing the term with customers. They had people that were using the platform, which was just a centralized exchange allowing people to exchange currencies, right? And so I have heard that they were doing a little bit of, us versus them and that sort of thing, but that's not really enough to build a strong community. So that's the first thing. It's not about customers, although you're definitely going to have a lot of overlap between your customers and your community, but people that are just there to use your product and they are not looking for people to get to know, for a place to hang out, for merch to wear, they're not really there for the community, but they might be there for the problem that you solve. Right? So it's not the same as customers, although there's going to be a lot of overlap. The second thing is, I had a call with a guy from a VC fund. He's like, here's how we grow our community. And then he proceeded to tell me how they basically hire a bunch of Indians to prop up their Twitter followers. And so I realized at the time, I'm like, oh, this guy thinks that Twitter followers is the same as community, but it is not. So we talked about that, there's value in having a lot of followers, especially legitimate ones. I think most people these days are pretty capable of making sort of a judgment decision on, did this account, buy followers or sort of get, cheap followers in some sense, or are they legit followers who care about the project? Because we can see the engagement rate, we can easily cross-reference it with other, let's say, real projects, and we can quickly find out whether a project has bought followers or engaged in some nefarious activity on that front. Followers, that's just a number, right? It's just followers. It's not the same as community. Community is a group of people that they have a core shared desire. So they have one thing that they want in life more than anything else. And the other people in that group or in that community, they want that same thing. So what happens is when you find those people, you find that this is the number one thing that they want, and you put them in a room together, that's when there's a bond. If you put a bunch of people together that have nothing in common, no bond, right? And so we're going to talk about what those things are that people typically want, because there's great sort of research on this. But just wanted to establish that first. So it's not the same as customers. It's not followers. Like just growing your follower count doesn't mean that you're growing your community, because that's just, followers or people in a Discord that's just a bunch of people that have nothing in common per se, other than the fact that they're in the same place or they follow the same account. There's nothing there more than that. So community, as we said, it's built on a shared core desire. So if you go back to the 1950s, there's great writing on this by Carl Jung, the psychiatrist. He basically found that there's four categories of things that people want. They either want they're sort of on a spiritual journey, they want to leave a mark, they're providing structure to the world, or they're trying to connect with others. And within those four categories, each one has sort of three subcategories where we really identify one core desire. I'll read them to you. I'll show you the table. So there's happiness, security and belonging, status and legacy and recognition, to be of service, freedom, to rebel or revenge, meaningful relationships, innovation, to live in the present, to find the truth of the world, to make dreams come true, and power and wealth. You'll also find that you're going to see characters in the movies that all apply, like one character, like Batman, for example. He's all about to be of service, right? He comes back and he's trying to help Gotham, right? He's trying to help the people of Gotham. And the same for his butler, right? Who's all about helping Batman. So that whole movie is the caregiver archetype. The main characters in that movie are really the caregiver archetype. So these archetypes, what you can do is you can make an educated guess based on where you are in your project. Maybe you don't have a community yet. Maybe you've already launched and you already have some data here. But if you're starting with nothing, make an educated guess. And I think one way to reverse engineer this is to think of the problem that you're solving, right? So you have a product that you're building or that you've already built that solves some kind of problem. Well, that problem is probably highly linked to what they want in life, right? So if I'm selling, let's say I help you make $10,000 a month, working 4 hours a week, and you can work from anywhere, right? If that's the problem that I'm solving for, then pretty obviously the freedom archetype or the freedom desire is the one that I'm appealing to, because my product is really an extension of the dreams of my audience. And so I think that's a really good way to think about it. Whether you're starting out, you can just make an educated guess. You're like, you know what you're building, you know the product or the problem you're trying to solve. What is the archetype that is really derived from that? And then if you already have some data, maybe you can also look at, here's some communication that we put out. We can see what's sort of resonating with people. This tweet outperformed that one by a factor of 10. So maybe there's something here. And then you should really attempt to identify which archetype you're trying to build your community on. If you're trying to build a community, to figure that out and then to just lean into that. So if you're selling them freedom, if you're selling happiness, well, lean into that, in every way, shape, or form. So that's a really good thing that I would say to kind of think about. And we're going to talk about branding next, which is really another extension. So we have the archetype, we have the problem that's being solved, which is, your product. And that is an extension of, their dreams. And then we have branding, which is also really an extension of their dreams, in the sense that people think of branding as aesthetic things or visual things. They think that branding means logo, font choices, website design, color pairings or color palette. And what really is the truth is that those are visual representations that should be reinforcing what branding really is, which is one feeling. Like your brand is about attaching your product to a certain feeling. And again, this feeling is pretty much going to be derived off of the core desire. So I'll give you an example here to kind of show you this to you. And I think what's really interesting is hopefully you have now had a bit of a discovery that, hey, maybe this marketing thing goes much deeper than most people realize, which is absolutely the case. What you find is the archetype, the feeling that people are after, and the product that they're selling in terms of what problem they're solving, it almost creates this template for you of, you should be operating within these lines. When you're communicating, when you're making an ad, when you're talking to them, this is what you're selling. Everything that you're doing should be within this little range right here. So Hugo Boss, the clothing brand, they are appealing to the ruler archetype, which they want power and wealth. So you can see that a lot of their ads are about, being a boss, right? It's like wearing a nice suit, smelling good, looking good. That's sort of the archetype that they are appealing to. And then the feeling that you can derive from there is control. control is what you get if you have power and wealth, right? It allows you an increased probability to control the outcome because you have money, which is a resource, and you have power, whether it's connections or whatever the case may be. So you have these two resources that allows you to have a higher sense of control. So if we look at the ad says success isn't born, it's made. And what that's really communicating, if we take it apart, is that if they were saying the opposite, if they were saying that success is born, well, then you don't have control of your success, right? You were either born into it or you were not. But that's not the case. At Hugo Boss, we believe that success is made. It's not born. You're in control of your future, right? So you can see how all of their communication is going to reinforce that feeling of control, because that's the thing that they want you to attach to the Hugo Boss brand. So when you want to feel in control, maybe I need a new Hugo Boss shirt. You know what I mean? So that's really branding as far as I see it. And I find that for myself, once I did the work to kind of break it down this way, it became a lot more easier to work with, because now it's really just a matter of being clear about what my audience wants, attaching or getting clear on a feeling that is attached to that. And then we're trying to reinforce that feeling. And I would say that for most communities, they're all going to basically fit into one of these 12 archetypes. But I think there's way more feelings that can be described than core desires. There's only X amount of core desires really that the most people want. But on the feeling side, you might get a little bit more nuance, right? So even you might be appealing to the ruler as well, but maybe the feeling is not necessarily control, but some sort of a, close second to that, or something that's very related to that. So there you go. That's branding. Okay, this brings us to point number 7. We're going to talk about vision. I also find that vision is something that a lot of projects are lacking. And if we talk about perceived value, this is one of the fastest, one of the easiest thing that you can do that's going to move the needle for you with your crypto or Web3 project. So when it comes to a decision about, let's say, getting involved in a project, whether we're talking about financially buying into a token or maybe getting involved as some sort of a participant, and by doing that, earning a token, let's say, people are not going to really evaluate you from where you are today. They're going to be evaluating from where you can be tomorrow. And so that's where the vision comes into play. The vision is really an explicit statement that tries to communicate, here's what we're trying to do. And there's a favorite example of mine, because I look across the ecosystem or the industry, let's say, of Web3, and most projects don't have a vision at all. And I think that having a clear vision that ticks some boxes is going to have a tremendous impact. I'm going to illustrate it to you in a very good example right now. So if we look at Cardano and Charles Hoskinson, I actually think he's a brilliant marketer. He might not even be aware of it, but the thing about Cardano is they reached almost $100 billion market cap in the last bull run in 2021. And so every project is going to reach whatever market cap they have because of intrinsic value and perceived value. We've already talked about that. That's going to establish the token price, and that's going to establish effectively the market cap at any given time. So with Cardano, they reached $100 billion market cap almost. And so then we look at, well, is it the intrinsic value or is it the perceived value? And so if we look at the intrinsic value, I'll give you some actual data. There's over 3,100 projects in crypto at the time of this recording that have received VC funding. And if you receive VC funding, it means that you probably had to send a lot of cold messages to VC funds. You had to get rejected by a lot of them, but you also had to get on a call with some of them multiple times. And they, who see a lot of offers, who are they have X amount of resources, X amount of capital, they're trying to deploy it where they think that they're gonna make their money. They're not dumb people, all right? They have researchers who are, spending a lot of time just researching projects, doing due diligence. They're not gonna just throw money at anything. So when a VC fund invests in a project, to me, that means something. And so out of 3,100 plus VC funded projects in crypto specifically, how many of them do you think are building on Cardano? 8. 8 projects are building on Cardano out of 3,100 plus. That also says something to me. It says that there's been a lack, so far at least, there's a lack of developers building on it, which also means that there's a lack of use cases, which also means that there's a lack of people using any sort of product or having any type of problem of theirs solved by a Cardano application. And this is no judgment on Cardano, by the way. Whatever they go on to do in the future, nobody knows, right? Well, we know what they're trying to do because they have a great vision. And this is my point. This $100 billion market cap number, almost, is not coming from the intrinsic value of somebody or lots of people having a problem solved in their lives and being better off for it, because the numbers are very low as far as the developer activity and so on and so forth compared to other ecosystems. So we know that most of it is perceived value. And specifically, the reason I said Charles Hoskinson is a great marketer is because he has put out thousands of tweets, and his pinned tweet is exactly the tweet that if I was his marketing advisor, I would tell him to pin. Because in that tweet, he outlines the vision for Cardano. He's doing a better job of it, by the way, on his Twitter in this pinned tweet than on the website. What he says is Cardano is an open platform that seeks to provide economic identity to the billions who lack it by providing decentralized applications to manage identity, value, and governance. And then all of his videos that he puts out, he spends a lot of time making videos. He's building on this. He's giving detail and nuance and continues to talk about the use cases and whatnot. But the vision is very good and it's very clear. And there's a key word in there that has a large impact, and that's billions. Because effectively what they are saying is, we are building something. It's going to impact billions of people in the future, and that's what it's all about. Because people are not evaluating you from where you are today, they're evaluating you from where you can be tomorrow. So vision is about the perceived future value. People are not buying Bitcoin for 19K because they think it's going to go to 10. They're buying it because they think it's going to go to 100K or a million, right? So when people are choosing where to spend their time and money, and by the way, there's probably a high correlation of like where people spend their money as far as investing in tokens and where they spend their time. Those are the projects they're going to pay attention to. Those are the projects they're going to spread the word about, and so on and so forth. So Hoskinson does a great job of that. I think a very large part of the almost $100 billion market cap can be explained by him being very clear on the vision and constantly talking about it. People have this sense that Cardano is going to be worth a lot in the future. That's ultimately the conclusion that people come to on their own. So ultimately, you know, the vision really helps you illustrate the future value of what you're trying to do. Because even if, you know, with a vision like that, even if Cardano is 1% successful, people are still going to arrive at the conclusion that, hey, it's probably a good investment for me to get involved, buy the token, spread the word, and so on and so forth. So that's really what the vision does for you. And I'm actually gonna go deeper here on a lesson that has changed my life, I would say. And what we're going to talk about is persuasion. So how do you convince somebody, and this also is going to reinforce why vision is so powerful, depending on what you put, you know, what type of words you put in there. But when it comes to persuasion and sort of convincing people to do something, there's a couple of things to be mindful of. You can't come out and say, you can't have a vision that says our token is going to 100x. You can't say that for legal reasons, and you can't say it because it's not very effective in convincing people. And I'll break that down for you. One of my favorite marketers, his name is Blair Warren. And he has this book that's very hard to come by the way, that I read. That's probably my favorite book that I've ever read as it relates to marketing. And he pointed out these 3 truths. And once I read them, I fully agreed. I wasn't aware of them. Most people are not aware of them, but I fully agreed. And once you accept these truths, you will be probably 100 times more effective at persuading people to do things, which is obviously, you know, you want to be persuading people to do things that are in their best interest. You can do it for things that are not in their best interest. We talked about Marshall Applewhite in the beginning. But that's not what we're here for. But let me break down these three truths for you, and I'll explain how this is useful. So, the first truth that he pointed out was that people reject unwelcomed attempts to persuade them. This is one of the things you want to write down in this video. People reject unwelcomed attempts to persuade them. Have you ever been walking in a shopping mall, or I used to live in Krakow, Poland. Those of you who have been there know that there's this main square area in Old Town, which is an awesome place. It's just, there's no cars there really. It's just a bunch of restaurants, a bunch of bars. They have a bunch of strip clubs there. And what they do is they put these girls on the street, like young girls, as promoters, and they go out there and try to recruit guys to come to their strip club. And then what happens is you're walking in Main Square in Krakow. It doesn't matter when. These people seem to be working all the time. I specifically remember I was like on my way home from the gym once at like 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, literally just going home to work. And this chick comes up like, and their pitch is always the same. Maybe strip club? I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I'm going to work. Here's my point. When these people, whether it's a strip club promoter or a salesman in a shopping mall, as you're walking around minding your own business, you see them in the corner of your eye. You can see that they are looking at you, they are coming towards you, and that you're about to be pitched something, and people resist unwelcomed attempts to persuade them, even if they're selling us something that we want. So what happens is we pull up this shield, we start thinking of excuses as they're approaching. We're like, what can I say to get rid of this person with minimal friction, awkwardness? I just want to get rid of them. We start thinking of excuses, literally, because we resist unwelcomed attempts to persuade them, even if we actually want what they're selling. It's just automatic. So the shield comes up. Okay, I think everybody here is going to be on board with the fact that that's true. The second thing that's also true is that you cannot resist what you cannot detect. And a quick example here is that I had this idea. By the way, somebody should build this. I think that the advertising industry is going to change because cost of advertising is going up and there's increasing sort of restrictions and everything. Like you can't advertise in crypto, for example, like on YouTube and Facebook and whatnot. So I think what's going to happen in the advertising industry, there's going to be like nano influencers. Like companies are going to start paying people that have 500 followers to put out a tweet for them. And so in order to organize all that, I thought of sort of like a Fiverr.com type of marketplace where you can have all the influencers there. They can have their pricing transparently, and you just submit a request. You're like, hey, we're this project. We want you to tweet this, and they can accept it or reject it. So I had this idea, right? And basically, in order to get people, I basically wanted to check the polls. I never ended up building this, and I'm not going to because I'm focused on what I'm doing now. But instead of going to influencers and saying like, hey, do you want to jump on my platform? I went to influencers because I understand these truths. You cannot resist what you cannot detect. I said, hey, how much do you charge for a retweet? So now they think I'm a potential client, right? And so now they'll start talking to me. And this exactly happened. All of them replied. They all started talking to me. And then I said, oh, by the way, like we're building this thing. Is this of interest to you? All of them said yes, by the way. And most of them would not have replied if I just came straight out the gate and tried to pitch them something because of the automatic shield coming up. So what did we say? We said that people are going to resist unwelcomed attempts to persuade them. We cannot resist what we cannot detect. And the final thing is that people might believe what you tell them, but they never doubt their own conclusions. And that's where the vision comes into play. And that's why I said you cannot just come out and say, hey, our token's going to 100x, because people might believe you. But if you get them to come to the conclusion that this thing is going to 100x, that is way more powerful. So the way that I like to think of it is you basically want to give people the ingredients. You want to give them the ammunition. And then, so you give them the ingredients and then they have to bake the cake on their own, mentally, right? And if we come back to the community that I joined 10 years ago, I specifically remember that entire process of joining that community because it was a big moment in my life. It was a lot of money. So the way that he did it is he armed us, he gave us the ammunition throughout the week. So it was one of those launches where there's like a week of him basically informing you about the product. There's one day where you can get in, and that's it. After that, you can't join anymore. And so the way that he did that is he released a video every day for like 7 days talking about all the things that we were going to do, how it works, blah, blah, blah. And then one thing he did that was really smart is he mentioned the price the day before the cart opened. And the reason why that was smart was people like myself, my knee-jerk reaction once I heard the price, which was $2,000, by the way, like 10 years ago, it was a lot of money, was that I'm not going to join. Like I remember making the decision, I'm not going to join. It's too much money. And then over the course of the next 24 hours, I proceeded to convince myself. And I remember walking up the hill from where I was living in Stockholm, in the city at the time, walking up the hill and asking myself a question. I'm like, what will happen if I join this thing? Well, it might work out. It might not work out. Maybe I'll meet some cool people. Maybe I'll learn some stuff. What will happen if I don't join? Well, nothing's going to change. Like my life is just obviously going to continue on the same trajectories now. And I had things that I really wanted that I didn't have. And that was it for me. That was it. I was in. I'm like, fuck it. It's $2,000. It's a lot of money. I would like to spend less, but I have no option because not joining means a guarantee of no success. Joining means at least a higher probability of success. So very powerful stuff. People reject unwelcome attempts to persuade them. People cannot resist what they cannot detect. And people might believe what you tell them, but they never doubt their own conclusion. So help them come to that conclusion. That's what Charles Hoskinson is doing with his vision. He's helping you come to the conclusion. I don't actually think he actually cares about this as far as like, he's not trying to maximize all the investors and all that. I believe he's a genuine guy and he's working on the product and that's what he cares about. But I do think that it explains the high market cap of almost 100 billion, given that, 8 VC funded projects on the list of all the VC funded projects in the industry. So that was a long thing because we talked about vision and we also talked about persuasion. So that you really want to write those 3 things down, or you really want to, like, whenever you're trying to get something done, see if you can reframe your approach based on those truths. I guarantee you're going to have a lot more success. All right. So that was vision and persuasion, a little mini class there. Again, if you like this stuff, subscribe to the channel while we're here. Let's move on to messaging. So if you think of vision as sort of this one explicit statement that's static, it doesn't usually change, and it's this goal that you probably never get to, but you're trying to achieve as a project. Messaging is really about the ongoing communication that you have as far as like your website, Twitter, Discord. It's like you're going to be saying stuff, and when people are seeing what you're saying, they have to make a decision. Do I want to pay more attention to this or do I not care? So messaging is really about finding what people see value in and then talking about that. And so I'll give you a quick example of how to approach this. Well, let me say first how to approach it. So what you do is you start off with a hypothesis. And actually, I'm going to come back to Blair Warren, who I just spoke of as my favorite marketer, because he has this one quote that I think is a great starting point for project. So let me read that to you. People will do anything for those who encourage their dreams, justify their failures, allay their fears, confirm their suspicions, and help them throw rocks at their enemies. That's messaging, okay? As far as a starting point goes, if you have some clarity based on our previous chats about community and that sort of thing, then you should at least have an educated guess about what dreams do they have? What are they trying to achieve? Why have they failed to achieve those dreams already? What fears and suspicions do they have about, this journey of trying to achieve this thing? And how can we confirm those or allay their fears? And then finally, how can we help them throw rocks at their enemies? Using that as a starting point is going to, at the very least, give you an idea of things that you can talk about that is going to help strengthen their relationship and help you put out things in the world that they find value in, that's going to resonate with them. And this thing is really important. And so what happens is, I'll give you a quick example because this is a good example just because there are metrics involved, and that's going to allow you to see the impact that this can have if you do it right versus if you don't do it right. When I first pivoted into sort of Web3 marketing, I put out a video called crypto marketing because I had to go pretty broad as I didn't know what people found value in. So that video was called crypto marketing, and then there's a sub headline to that. That video has 5.5% click-through rate on YouTube. So that number of 5.5% is telling me something about how much this thing is resonating with the people that are seeing the impressions, right? If 5.5% of people are seeing it, that says that it's resonating much more than if it was 1% and much less than if it was 10%, right? So what happened was that video kind of, I don't want to say it took off because volume wise, it doesn't have a lot of views, but it's an audience with a lot of intent. So I've gotten a lot out of that video. A lot of people have messaged me, a lot of Web3 founders who I've then offered to just jump on a free call with to offer a free consultation. And what I found in this case and in all the businesses that I've started in the past is that pretty much like clockwork, once you jump on a call with a 10th person from your audience, you start to see some kind of pattern. Like you've heard 8 out of those 10 guys explain the same thing to you or use the same word that you never thought of using. And so messaging is really about starting off with something, put something out, getting to know your audience, and then tweaking or refining the stuff you say and how you say them to resonate more with them. So on that 10th call, I had the realization that 8 out of those 10 people were a project that had not launched yet, and they wanted to know more about crypto go-to-market strategy, which means that probably 80% of people that are watching this are probably in a similar boat. The day after, I said, okay, with this massive realization, let me start to lean into this a bit. I made a video and I put crypto go-to-market strategy in the title, and that video had 12.2% click-through rate, more than double the crypto marketing one. And so imagine for a second that every tweet that you put out, everything on your website, every Discord message that you sent, imagine if more than twice the amount of people that pay attention to it now would pay attention to it. How do you think that would affect the project, the growth, the success, and so on? Literally more than twice the amount of people found value in something that came out of a realization from talking to my audience. So that's what messaging is about, right? It's about having an idea of who my target audience is, what they find value in. We've talked about value. And then leaning into that and then just continue to refine your message. And I think the Blair Warren quote is a great starting point for you. So have a brainstorm about what are their dreams, their failures, who's their enemy, what are they afraid of as far as, going on this journey, like what do they think might happen, what are they skeptical of, and so on and so forth. And then you can start there and then just refine your messaging and the things that you talk about from there. Okay, so that was messaging. Let's move on now to another interesting topic, which is high value positioning or just positioning. Probably you want to have high value positioning, but you don't have to. So positioning is very interesting. I mentioned it briefly before in the sense that positioning primarily is really about where are you on the social hierarchy, right? And like I said before, people value things based on how other people value things. So in 2009, I spent the summer living in Los Angeles and I worked with a talent manager and an entertainment lawyer. And that was a really cool experience. I got to meet some cool people. But I was at a pool party once. And it was one of those LA pool parties. And there's a guy there. His name is Jesse Metcalf. He's an actor, and he was on the show Desperate Housewives at the time. And that was relevant at the time. Timing, remember timing? That show was on and it was hyped, and he was on the show and he was the handsome, attractive, young guy. He's at this pool party, and I kid you not, there was a line of 4 blonde chicks waiting to go talk to him because one was already talking to him. And they would talk to him for like 3 minutes. They would give him a kiss on the lips, and then she would leave, and then the next blonde chick would walk up and talk to him and give him a kiss, and that went on. Even if you don't know who the guy is, do you think that by seeing that, you would have placed him higher on the social hierarchy? Of course, because that's how we as humans value things socially. We look at what value are other people placing on this, and then we automatically just default to that, right? So if everybody's looking at one person in a room, then we all assume that that's the highest value member in the room on the social hierarchy. So when it comes to your project, this is something that you can use or at least try to be strategic about and get the value out of it, because, and this is like a funny example, so like bear with me, but when Dan Bilzerian was on the Joe Rogan podcast, I found this fascinating. He said that being famous was 20 times more powerful as it relates to getting laid than being rich. And I find that fascinating. And so that has to do with positioning, right? So if you're higher on the social hierarchy, it's sort of like a shortcut to get things, right? So if you want success for your project, if you want attention, if you want eyeballs, if you want to score an interview with somebody and they don't know who you are versus they know who you are and they know that you're high on the social hierarchy, you're going to get that opportunity versus you won't if nobody ever heard of you. So that's what positioning is about. And then there are many things that you want to sort of avoid, I would say, because with positioning, it's almost more about the things that you don't do than the things that you do. And so positioning wise, in terms of like, you can try to take shortcuts. You can have a list of people that you would like to collaborate with in your project or other projects that you would like to collaborate with that are higher on the social hierarchy than you. I've given the example before, like if Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was like, hey, Robert's my personal trainer, he's the one who gets me in shape for all my movies, he just transferred like all of that attention, all of that trust that he had built, that he had gained, and just gave it to me for free. And so that's one of the shortcuts with sort of doing collaborations and partnering with other people, especially if they're slightly higher than you are on the social hierarchy. You can kind of like use that as a shortcut to increase your positioning, and that's going to kind of help you long term. And I also like to think of this, I said that it's a lot about what you don't do versus what you do. I call this the magnet method. You can either go to people where you want something from them, or you can be strategic about it and try to get them to come to you. And when they come to you, the positioning is completely different. Completely different. Because you're not going to them like, hey, fill my empty cup, right? So whether you are trying to land a launch pad where you can launch your project, you're trying to score VC funding for your project, whatever the case may be, or one of those partnerships that I talked about. In an ideal world, they would come to you, right? But in the beginning, that's very hard to do. But I want you to be aware of that dynamic change, right? You going to them versus them coming to you is fundamentally a different positioning. Your success rate is going to be 100 times, 10 times higher if they come to you. So it's really about being very clear on what you're doing, solving a real problem, having a legit project, doing all the things right, and then there's time involved, right? As time grows, these things are going to pop up. I don't want you to be afraid of like doing cold outreach and stuff like that, especially if you're starting out. You don't have any options. But if you're strategic about your brand, then as you grow and as you become more known and you do things right, you're going to want to do that probably less because you lose a lot of positioning on that front. Okay? So that's really the main thing I would say on the positioning side. I think that's an interesting one. Let's move on to the final 10th topic. All right, so the final thing here is basically go-to-market hacks. I called it that because I know that a large part of the audience are people who want go-to-market strategy, and I just wanted to point out one of the shortcuts, which very much kind of ties in what we just spoke on, and that is if you're trying to launch a project, it's actually harder for you. It's more work and it's more difficult to go from 0 people giving a shit about your project to 1 person, from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, from 3 to 4, then 0 to 100 in one go. I gave the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson example. And what's happening in that example is that I'm tapping into an existing audience, right? So if Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has 340 million Instagram followers and he says, Robert's my trainer, he just transferred all of those people and all that attention to me. And then it's up to them whether that converts or not. Maybe they don't care about fitness, right? But one of the shortcuts that you really can take advantage of, and this is what's great about Web3 is, and we come back to sort of base layer understanding of human behavior. Incentives have to be aligned for this to work, right? So when you have incentives aligned, that's when there's word of mouth and that's when people want to work with you. When their incentive doesn't align, when it's just you that's gaining something, then there's not going to be a deal. So what I'm getting to here is that tapping into existing audiences is actually very easy compared to, let's say, in the Web 2 world, because incentives are aligned here. So if you go to a launch pad and they launch your token or your NFT project, they are going to get a cut of the sales. And so they're opening up their community to you, and you get access to their capital from their community. And in exchange, they get a cut of the profits. By the way, this would work in Web 2 as well. But it's been done so much, and it's like an established business in Web 3, like the Launchpad idea. So you can do things like that. You can make sure that you understand that incentives have to align. I always quote Charlie Munger, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome, right? People are going to work off of that. So tap into existing audiences. So that can mean maybe the blockchain that you're building on is willing to promote you. Some blockchains do that, some don't. So look at whether they do that or not. Maybe you need to get a grant from them, and maybe then they'll promote you. So look at the blockchain you're working on. Look at launch pads, whether it's an NFT launch or a token launch. Definitely look at launch pads. It's one of the great shortcuts to getting into other people's, getting into other communities basically. And then just look at other sort of random collaboration opportunities, right? So who else could we partner with where they get something out of it, we get something out of it, everybody is happier. Where that happens, you're going to find a lot of success, and just being able to partner with people. Look, we talked about positioning wise, it's going to help you with positioning, and it's also going to help you, raise money. If you're trying to, sell your token, your community or your followers number is going to go up. And from that, probably there's going to be X amount of people or X percentage that actually becomes a community member, as we've discussed. And this is very powerful. The reason Andrew Tate blew up the way that he did was that he had this economic engine working for him. I don't know if everybody realized this, but the way that it worked is he had this program. It was called Hustlers University. I think it was like $50 a month. And he had an affiliate program for this program. I don't know what the cut was that he gave, but based on what I saw happen on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, whatever, how people would literally spend their entire day like chopping up Andrew Tate clips and then putting an affiliate link in the description. Based on how much time they devoted to that, I am almost certain that he gave a very good cut from the sales. So if I get you to sign up, you sign up for $50 a month without even knowing the number, my guess is that he probably would have given out like 40 to 100% of that money to you, the affiliate, on a recurring basis so that you get paid every single month. So that's an example of incentives aligned. He had an affiliate program. He created this sort of economic engine. And then, of course, he had the ammunition, right? He had all this controversial content that people could go out and chop up and put up on YouTube and TikTok and whatnot. But then you have leverage. He went from Andrew Tate and his whatever internal video production team being limited to put out X amount of content to hundreds of people who are now financially incentivized to go just take his content, chop it up, and put it out there. So he created this economic engine. He got an army of people to spread the word of him. Even when he got canceled, he's still all over YouTube because people are still doing that. And so that's what you have to understand. And as far as sort of hacks go, when it comes to go-to-market, that's the one thing that I would be looking at. Like, what are some existing audiences that I could already tap into? Whew. All right, so we made it to the end of the video. I want to thank you very much for watching. And the last thing that I'll leave you with is that I was telling you about how messaging works and how it's effectively about talking to your audience and getting to know them better. So at the time of this recording, what I'm doing is trying to learn more about my audience. And so what I'm doing is I'm offering you a free consultation. There's no strings attached. It's very simple. You go sign up for a call with me. I'll jump on and help you and give you some advice around your go-to-market strategy, or if you've already launched, how to think about your project long-term from a marketing perspective and sustainability. And there's no strings attached. So there's X amount of days in a week. There's X amount of hours that I have to dedicate to this. So I'm not sure how long I'll be doing this, but at the time of this recording, there are a couple of spots available on a weekly basis. So by all means, jump on and get a free consultation while you can. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of these types of videos. I'm also doing interviews. At the end of the day, this whole movement, this whole mission, kingmaking.xyz, is all about increasing your probability of success with your Web3 project. So that's where we derive all the content from. So if you need a directory of influencers or a list of launch pads, then those are the products we're gonna make. If you need an interview with a company that raised $100 million from VC funds and trying to learn how to raise VC funds, then that's what we're gonna focus on. So that's the core mission here. And the last thing that I'll ask of you is if there's one main takeaway for you, something that you wrote down, or maybe just something that you're pretty sure is gonna stick with you, I would love to know that. So drop a comment with your main takeaway. And with that, I'll see you in the next video. Ciao.